book from a daily Christian living standpoint, but it also deals with some specifics regarding Christian doctrine. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. It's one of the big things to me about Scripture, about inspiration, is the duality that's contained in there. James is full of some really neat duality also, which is another reason why I like it. I need to get my clicky thing, which never wants to cooperate. Hey, you know what? I bet you if I turn it on, it kind of works. Okay, by way of introduction, kind of keep this brief. Most likely, this is the brother of Jesus. One of the neat things that Paul does in Galatians chapter 2 and verse 9 is he lists what are known as pillars of faith, so to speak. And he cites James and Cephas, which is Peter, and John. Well, it's kind of interesting that this portion of the New Testament, the way the books fall in order, are James, 1st and 2nd Peter, and 1st through 3rd John. So I think that's kind of neat. But there are references to a brother of Jesus by the name of James. I have those cited up there. He's sometimes referred to as James the Less, sometimes James the Just. Jerome kind of thinks that maybe it was a cousin of Jesus, not exactly a brother, but there's a little bit of debate about that. Regardless, it appears that there is some sort of familial tie. The epistle is universal. In other words, when James starts off, he doesn't address this to a specific group of Christians in a specific location. It's very general. Now, it's believed that it was intended for those that were in Jerusalem, but he didn't state that specifically. So therefore, the intention of it is it's meant to be read, copied, and circulated. This is an epistle that's going to be good for Christians everywhere because it applies to everyone. The date and the time is unclear as far as when exactly it was written. He's believed to be martyred in either AD 62 or AD 69. I was kind of looking into this a little bit this morning. Josephus cites that he was stoned with others in AD 62. There's a prophecy in chapter 5, verses 1 through 6, that is believed to pertain to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And so I think that's why sometimes some people believe maybe it's dated 69 like the year before, like it's that pending. One of the things of interest to me is the fact that Martin Luther objected to the inclusion of the Epistle of James in the New Testament. He had a real problem with it because he thought that it opposed what Paul said about the justification of faith in Romans, and therefore he didn't feel like it needed to be in there. However, James does not do that. Yes, James stresses that there is a need for works, that we are supposed to be active, that we're supposed to be doers of the word, and that's a huge theme, especially in this first chapter. But he always does that under the fact that faith precedes love, and works of love, and also the fact that without works, faith is dead. How else do you demonstrate it? How else do you prove that you're actually living by faith? Unless you do things according to faith. Many consider this epistle to be the Proverbs of the New Testament. To me, it strikes me much more closer to Ecclesiastes, but that's me. The design of the epistle, it's meant to reprove Christians for their general degeneracy in faith and manners. Why would that be taking place? Persecution. You know, when times get hard, a lot of times we forget the type of people we're supposed to be. And so he's reiterating that to them, and he's stressing that to them. It's to prevent the spread of libertine doctrines that threatened all practical godliness. So already there were deviations to Christianity that were still being viewed as Christianity that were beginning to pop up. And they needed to be on guard of these things. It's to awaken the Jews to a sense of greatness and a nearness to judgment. But one of the things that James will stress is that it is not about the physical Israel, it is about the spiritual Israel, which is something I'm pretty sure a lot of them were still having trouble processing, having trouble relating to sometimes. But he also wants them to know that judgment is pending. Now it's been 2,000 years. Does that mean that judgment is no longer pending? No, judgment is always pending because we have no idea, no guarantee of the time or day, except that it is pending and it will come when we least expect it. It's meant to support all Christians in the way of their duty and the calamities and persecutions that they would meet. And this is one of the reasons why I love this book, is because it deals specifically with this topic, more so, I think, than any other book does in the New Testament. Yes, there's other epistles that do touch on this subject, but James seems to break it down in a way that to me just really gives that the best perspective to keep in mind. The truths are momentous. That is, they are timely. And they are meant to be maintained and observed in application even today. They are long-standing. They were timely then. They are timely now. And then finally, for the sake of kind of breaking down the way that we can look at this, the statements in here can be kind of listed in one of four aspects or one or four categories, and that's the way I'm going to present it. You have statements of perspective, you have statements of application, you have statements of admonition, and then there are citations or examples. That is, he may refer to a passage of Scripture, or he may cite specific instances or people. So we won't see any of the last one in this first chapter, but mainly we'll see perspective, application, and admonition that run the course throughout the epistle. Any comments or questions about James? What are y'all's thoughts on the epistle and the writer? Yes. Yes. Right. Yes, we do. Anybody else? Yes, no, yes, sir. Right. Yes. And I think I, I've been guilty of moments of passive faith. I think we all do that. We go through periods where we're kind of passive about it. We go through periods where we're aggressive about it. The thing is that faith never needs to remain in a passive state, because when it becomes passive, James' point is it has become stagnant. And if it has become stagnant, then it's of no use. It's of no use to God, it's of no use to others, and it is certainly of no use to you. So you need to be active. You need to find ways to be active. I think sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot in that regard, because we look at other people and see what they do, and we want to compare ourselves to that. And well, I can't do that, they're doing that. So and we kind of start putting ourselves in a cubby hole, or backing ourselves in a corner. Everybody can do something. Just find what you can do. And if you can't do it, if I can't do what Alan can do, to the degree Alan can do it, well, so what? Doesn't mean I can't do it, period. And I can always there's an area I can always work on and strive to make progress in, but we have a tendency to cut bait with things like that, unfortunately. Okay, we'll get into chapter 1. He begins with his introduction. James, a bondservant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. And this is what is neat to me. If we take this to be that James is the physical brother of Christ, or is physically related to Christ, is his emphasis on that relationship? No. His emphasis is on the spiritual relationship with Christ. He considers himself a bondservant. He speaks to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Now, is he speaking just to Jewish Christians that are probably scattered abroad? I don't think so. I think he's stressing a spiritual Israel over a physical Israel. Because just because you were a Gentile and became a Christian doesn't mean you weren't going to get persecuted for that. Jew, Gentile, if you were a Christian, then you were going to fall subject to persecution. And you may feel the need to pull up stakes and leave. Because that's what the Jews had to do in some instances, in some places. And so that is what he is stressing. He is stressing the spiritual dynamic over the physical one. even his own. All right, continuing verse 2 through 8, he says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways." Okay. Right off the bat, he starts off with this perspective: joy in various trials. Can you imagine first receiving this epistle, and you open it up, hey, it's from James. Let's read this. "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials." What? "Knowing that the testing of it's for you." How many of us look at trials joyfully when we're undergoing something that has us so stressed, so anxious, so bent out of shape? Do you stop and go, hey, this is a good thing? Because I don't. Yeah. This seems contrary to human kin, so to speak. But from a physical perspective, because suffering's not fun. But we don't take time to pause and think about the spiritual benefit of it. And I think that's what we wrestle with a lot, is trying to keep that perspective against whatever physical trial we're undergoing. Because the intention ultimately is that we should regard this as an opportunity to grow in our faith and in our reliance and in our trust in God, first and foremost. And if we can keep that perspective, that should help us immensely. It does not mean necessarily that the trial is going to come to a screeching halt and be over and done with because we're doing that, does it? Some things take a little longer to suss out than others. Some things have to run their course. And when it's short-lived, that's great, because we can get past it, we can start building on it, we can get it behind us. But when we have something that seems to be long-lasting, ongoing, that lasts for weeks or months, in some case years, it can be weary. It can be debilitating to us physically, psychologically, spiritually. We have to strive to keep the proper perspective about these things. Because what is the application that James gives? It makes us better. It produces patience. A commodity that I wish they sold on the shelves at Walmart. Because producing it myself, I hate that. That is never fun. Yes, sir. Yes. Right. It is, and you're absolutely right. That's a good perspective. So, like, if you want to diet, you select your weight. That's what you're shooting for, right? And so you subject yourself to a dietary regimen, maybe to a physical regimen with an end goal in mind of this ideal weight that you've selected for yourself. And so that's fun to do, isn't it? It's fun to restrict yourself to certain foods that you hate. It's fun to engage in exercises like work those abdominal muscles and shed some of that fat, because those are like the best ones to do, right? But you undergo that. You suffer through it. Why? Because you've got that ideal weight in mind. You go and weigh yourself to see what kind of progress you're making. I only dropped 2 pounds this week. Next week, been cheating a little bit. I only shed half a pound. I knuckle down. You know. But you're looking for that end goal, that ideal weight. Well, from a spiritual perspective, it's the same thing. And what is our end goal? Well, he goes on to talk later about the crown that we will receive, that God will grant us. That's our goal. So when we're undergoing the trials and the suffering that will bring us to spiritual maturity, that will help bring us to spiritual completeness, that will help get us to our spiritual ideal weight, how often do we think about the crown that awaits us? I don't so much. And I need to. I don't think so much about the crown so much as a lot of times I think about I need to make sure I'm good with God. I need to make sure that I am right with God. Which essentially, by doing that, gets me the crown, but I'm not going to lie, a crown seems kind of ostentatious to me. I'm not a big jewelry guy, so I don't think in those terms. I just want to be right with God in the end. To me, that is my ideal spiritual way. I am right with God. But we've got to keep the spiritual goal in our mindset when we're dealing with things like this. And the difficulty I find is the fact that we've got a spiritual goal, but we're dealing with things on a physical plane. And this is what we know. This is what we're used to. And we get kind of tangled up in the difficulty of that. And it's hard not to. We're human. And the great thing is that God understands that. But He gives us constant reminders about what we should actually be concerned about. Yes, sir. Right. Yes. So, in striving to, in dealing with the testing of our faith, and it's really neat. The Greek word that he used here for testing is taken from the Greek root word dikamos. And this was a term that was used in regards to coins, specifically people that manufactured coins. Because the idea is that they were supposed to be honorable people to make sure that the coins had the proper weight, that nothing had been whittled or shaved off of them, which would then make them counterfeit. So that is the whole purpose when he's talking about the testing of our faith, is it's an honorable thing, and it is meant to serve us correctly with the purpose toward patience, toward completeness and maturity. The admonition is that you need to let patience have its perfect work, that you may be mature or complete and lacking in nothing. Then he gives us perspective for anyone lacking wisdom to ask God, to go to him. Because, well, God, if you desire wisdom and you turn to God and seek God and ask him for it, is God going to be like, you don't need that. You don't need none of that? No. We will receive an answer. It may not necessarily be the answer that we want, that we're looking for, but we will get it. And it says that he gives it liberally. It says that he gives it without reproach. In other words, it's not personal if he doesn't give it to you. It's not like he likes somebody more than you. He will disperse it. However, in seeking wisdom from God, how do we go about that? Knowing that he'll give it, which means that we ask in faith, but without doubting. Now, here's where, look, I'm going to apologize right now because we could spend a whole quarter in James, and I got 5 chapters to cover in 4 class periods. So we're going to have to shuck and jive here in a little bit. But here's the thing with this, and this is one of the things that I personally have wrestled with. I have gone to God time and time and time and time again in prayer, seeking wisdom, seeking help with something. And I got it. Sometimes I got it in the form I asked for or seeking. Sometimes I didn't get it because I was asking for the wrong thing. Sometimes it came in an avenue that I least expected. But I also know that there are times that I have gone to God and asked for things, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I have consulted you, I have sought you out regarding things in the past that I didn't feel like you really helped me deal with. Or what it really boils down to is help me deal with it in the way I wanted. That's where the issue is. And so we may go to God under the premise of, I'm going to ask. I don't know, you may not do anything. But I'll ask because I'm supposed to. Wrong answer. I am guilty of that. But I would never consider myself to be somebody who's wishy-washy regarding my faith in God. I wouldn't consider myself to be like a man that's tossed about like a wave on the sea, but I have been. And my perspective was wrong because I'm thinking about, well, God didn't address this the way I thought he ought to address it. Too bob bad for me. What about all the times he did address it? Why do I fail to look at that? Well, that's probably a sign of my spiritual immaturity, don't you think? I do. So that's something I strive now as I get older to keep that perspective more in mind than when I was in my 20s or my 30s or my 40s even. Moving on, verses 9 through 11. James is going to deal with, roles in society, so to speak, on some level, particularly economic status among people in places. Here, he states that the lowly brother should glory in his exaltation, and the rich brother should glory in his humiliation. That's the proper perspective that they should have. If you're poor, what riches can you exalt then? Well, you can exalt in your spiritual riches. Because at the end of the day, when all is said and done and it's all over, those are the only riches that really count. You may not experience anything like that in a physical level now, but you will. And you can exalt in that. You can look forward in that. With the rich brother, he's to glory in his humiliation. We're talking about humbleness. We're not talking about being abased or degraded or anything like that, even though he should abase himself. But what he needs to understand is that he needs to look at his wealth, at his earthly gain, and realize that, on a spiritual sense, profits him nothing. And he should glory in that. Thankful that he has it, but not trust in it. And he drives home the point in verse 11. He says, "For no sooner has the sun risen with a burning heat than it withers the grass, its flower fails, its beautiful appearance perishes, so the rich man also will fade away in his pursuit." Life and its pleasure fades away. It is not everlasting. That means the beauty, the blessedness of this physical life is also subject to the climates and the consequences of this physical life. That's the application and the admonition. That's the perspectives that we need to keep in mind. Verses 12 through 18. He said, "Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, 'I am tempted by God,' for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then, when desire has been conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good and every perfect gift is from above, and it comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Of his own will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of his creatures." This is one of my favorite passages in all the New Testament. It is a succinct, direct description of sin, of how it begins, the stages it goes through, and its ultimate outcome. And it is broken down so simply. And I love the fact that he kind of uses the metaphor from verse 11 when he talks about the temporariness of physical life, kind of uses that same metaphor for how sin begins. as a temptation, as a desire, that is the kernel, that is the seed. And from there, it grows. It blooms. But what is it? It leads to death. You know what that kind of, you know the way I kind of visualize that? Kind of visualize that as a seedling that sprouts up out of the ground and it grows, but as it grows, it's dying. And when it's full grown, it's nothing but a massive dead tree. Which is the exact opposite of what happens. But see, sin does not lead to life, it leads to death. And so in my head, that visualization, it kind of works. But this is just like in the second verse. Blessed is he who endures temptation. Show of hands, how many people feel blessed when they're enduring temptation? Yeah, me neither. But we are. Because again, this is where he cites. Here's the application. Here's the spiritual ideal way. We will receive the crown of life that is promised by God upon his approval. Now, one of the things we need to keep in mind is let no one say, I am tempted by God. How many of you have ever heard someone make a statement along those lines? Just me and Randy? Come on, y'all need to get out more. You too, Jane? Why would somebody say that? Okay. Okay. Absolutely. So I had a coworker that he had been brought up going to church. I don't remember the denomination, but so he went, took his wife, took his kids, but he was also living a worldly life on the side. Started messing around on his wife, but was trying not to. At least that was the impression I got from talking to him a couple of times when he'd bring it up. But we were at work one day, and he brought that up. And he was like, man, he goes, I just don't get it. Why is God tempting me? And I said, Joe, that was his name, Joe. I said, Joe, that ain't God tempting you. That's you tempting you. You're hanging out around this woman that is not your wife. You ain't got no business being around. Here's an idea. Stop doing that. Just remove that factor out of the equation totally. We couldn't do it. And I've even heard members of the church say something along this line. We get the idea, and this is me. Does God test us? Absolutely. Does God tempt us? No. There is a distinct difference. The testing, the trials are meant to improve and bolster and grow our faith and grow our reliance on God. But when things like that happen, when God tests us in that way, it is not a temptation to appeal to our physical desires, which would ultimately undermine us. I do not believe he operates that way. To me, there is a big distinction. Sometimes the Greek words that are used in the translations, depending on the translator, they may use tempt, they may use tested. We need I think, to make a distinction. Because ultimately, there are two sources at the root of our temptations. There is Satan, and there is us. God has nothing to do with that. And then here's the other thing. He talks about the progression, how temptation grows and becomes sin. Dallas, do you know what's a temptation for you? I mean, you don't have to give me an example. I'm just asking, do you know? Ron, do you know what tempts you? David, do you know what tempts you? Okay. I know temptations that appeal to me. That means when they occur, we should be able to identify them like that and take the action not to act on them. And a lot of times we do. A lot of times we're good about that. But sometimes we have our moments of weakness, don't we? He says, do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. He's not saying don't let somebody deceive you. He's saying do not kid yourselves. Do not fool yourselves. We do that all the time. And he's stressing that to them. Yay, 5 minutes. So, he stresses to them the other side of that. You see, every good and perfect gift comes from above, from the Father of lights, in whom there is no variation. In other words, he does not change, and there is no shadow of turning. He has no suspect motives. God is not trying to trip anybody up. You know why? Because we don't need his help to do that. He knows we're capable of doing that all by ourselves. He does not want us to trip up. Therefore, he is not going to do things to cause us to trip up and have suspect motives like that. You know who does? Satan. Satan's the one who likes to try to paint things as good when actually underneath they have an evil overtone that we may only discover later. God's gifts are the result of his own free will to bring us forth, to be, he's telling these Christians at this time to be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. We are not the first fruits, but we can be those same kinds of fruits of those creatures, which are God's people. Verse 19 through 20, we could talk the whole class period about this. Here's the application and the admonition. Be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. How do we want to operate the majority of the time? Now, we want to be slow to hear. I don't care what you have to say. Swift to speak, swift to anger. We want to jump the gun. We start drawing our own conclusions even as people are speaking to us sometimes, don't we? Don't we? Just me? Okay. I'll work on that. You know, when we're discussing things with one another or with anybody, it's good to give them the benefit of the doubt and try to hear the whole story and get their whole side, right? And we need to be slow about cutting in on them, immediately forming things in our mind, getting bent out of shape about it. Because you know what that is? Being slow to hear, swift to speak, swift to anger, that is being judgmental. As a Christian, you are not going to persuade anybody with that tactic. And you're going to butt heads with your brothers and sisters that way also. It says, the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. You know, there are sometimes we feel like we know better, like we need to set folks straight about things, right? But is that coming from a humble heart? Is that coming with love a lot of times? No. They need some wrath. I'm here to give it to you. Yes, sir. No, you're good. We're trying to wrap this up. Finally, in concluding verses 21 through 27, he stresses to them that they need to lay aside all filthiness and overflow of wickedness. I think there's a translation that takes that phrase, overflow of wickedness, and translates it as superfluity of naughtiness, which doesn't really have the same literary weight to me, but sounds kind of neat. That word that is used there for overflow is a Greek term that describes the excess wax in somebody's ears. Yeah, pretty gross. He's saying that you need to remove things such as that. You need to receive, is the admonition, with meekness. Do we like receiving critiques or criticism with meekness? No. The implanted word that is able to save our souls. God's word is a critique on the human condition. And some people have difficulty receiving that. He stresses that we need to be doers of the word, not hearers, deceiving ourselves. We need to be more active in that. He draws a really neat contrast that I'm sure you're all familiar with about a man looking in the mirror and then walking away and forgetting what he's seen. We like to do that. And then finally,